coming up in this episode.
I actually think the comparison between shopaholism and collecting is pretty damn good.
Mhm,
I at first resisted that a little bit because
mhm.
I'm realizing through this conversation that I collect more things than I realize. I'm like, oh, I collect whiskey and currency and 80s and 90s nostalgia. Like, what else do I collect?
And if you think about us existing here as extensions of the people that came before us, we are inheriting some of their ways of approaching things, both from a society angle and from a, genetic and epigenetic level. It's veering off of the collecting angle in a way, but I think the collecting angle was only a conduit for trying to reach the concept that exists beneath it. Hey everybody, I'm Cody.
And I'm Evan,
Welcome back to Men's Search for Meaning.
the podcast where we explore concepts that we could all relate to and walk away with a deeper understanding of ourselves and what we think.
Something that has captured my attention recently has been pocket knives. There's something just intriguing about it to me as one of those sort of ancient tools. And I don't want to go too much into that. But in my time learning about these things, I came across this fairly common experience, which is there are many collectors who acquire much more than they need in terms of quantity. So other examples would be people that, collect sneakers or, there was the whole Beanie Baby craze in the 90s. And the same thing is true in pocket knives. And it's interesting because even for people that consider a pocket knife a tool that has a practical use, you can only use one at a time, and so having 100 plus pocket knives doesn't really make sense. And I was thinking about this and made some observations that I think span a lot wider than just that hobby in particular. And I think for many people, it's a strong urge to acquire things. And I think this goes back to some of our evolutionary history around, going out and foraging food or other resources. There was a very important internal drive to have an idea of something that would benefit your situation or would be directly proportional to your survival, and then going out and pursuing that thing and capturing it, maybe hunting. That can be a very arduous process. So I think that's where our fascination with collecting can come from. What stands out to you here? Do you have personal experience with this? Is anything about the way I'm phrasing it a different take than you had heard before? What comes to mind for you first?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting topic that I never would have thought to speak about, which is one
Mm,
thing that I enjoy about many of the topics you bring up.
yeah.
Because I have been a collector of things since I was a kid. I have never thought of myself as principally a collector, but I
Hmm.
collected coins and stamps when I was little, and today I collect 80s and 90s nostalgia.
Hmm.
And I also collect like dollar bills. For me, the collecting idea, I totally resonate with what you said. I just hadn't ever thought of what made it so appealing to me.
It's interesting because I think when someone's going to collect something, first there is the idea of it. The oh, wouldn't it be great to have this? And it's kind of a simulation. We don't know what it would be like to have that thing, but we're using our imagination to say, oh man, if I had these shoes, these would look so great, or I would wear these to this place, or this knife is made of this particular steel and that's really good for this kind of thing. That's the spark that starts the whole thing. And then there's the pursuit of the thing. Maybe you're trying to find something that was a limited release. You're searching the secondary market, and say you find it. That's an exciting moment in of itself. The pursuit can be fun as well. Some people say that that's what they really enjoy about it the most. And then I think the most exciting point is you found that thing and it arrives to your house and it's like, oh my God, this is that thing. It's so amazing. I'm so excited right now. That often either quickly doesn't land the way that we expect it to or dissipates very quickly, and then the cycle begins anew, and that's the part that is so fascinating to me. I think when we acquire something, when it finally arrives, I've had the experience of feeling a little bit disappointed. It's like something about the idea of it is more exciting than getting the thing itself, and then it arrives and it's like, "Yeah, okay, maybe this isn't as practical as I thought. Maybe this isn't this didn't fix my whole life finding and acquiring this thing." And then the process goes around in this cyclical order. And, the the idea of something, pursuing it, acquiring it, all those things are dopamine-driven activities, which is a very, important, I guess it's a neurotransmitter in our brain for motivation and reward and all these kinds of things. But it's just fascinating to me how this cycle ends up repeating. And a lot of people don't really have success with breaking the cycle. They just end up with these monstrous collections because this behavioral um, system sort of goes unchecked. So, what comes to mind for you first? Because for me, this is a fascinating topic.
The original appeal of the collection, I think, is its own distinct item of interest because I believe for me, uh, the first thing I wanted was an old $100 bill, the way that hundreds used to look in the '80s
Hmm.
and '90s, early '90s and stuff, because it reminded me of my dad. I didn't see my dad that much when I was a kid,
Hmm.
and he always had, like, a stuffed wallet full of cash. He was this, old school guy from Queens that really valued that. Even when he didn't have a lot of money to his name, he always had, like, a few hundreds in his wallet, and it was just his way of being like, "I'm alright, I got
Yeah.
money," kinda thing. And to
Yeah.
me, it was, like, cool. It was, like, what my
Yeah.
dad did, and I wanted to do that when I was an adult.
Hmm.
And so this is years later what caused me to become interested in getting one old $100 bill so I could look at it and, I don't know, have the feeling of connecting to that excitement of being with my dad.
Yeah.
Um, but then I tried getting another $100 bill, like an older one, um, and I remember thinking, like, "This is cool. I could start a collection on this," but it certainly didn't have the appeal, but you're right, it just kind of fell down in excitement as soon as I got it, and
Yeah.
I don't really look at it that much, even though I think it's neat. I just don't
Yeah.
look at it that much. So I am experiencing, what you're saying.
Would you be willing to drill down into some of those specific experiences more? Do you recall the circumstances surrounding? Because I'm curious, like, what sparked the interest? If this was something that you had thought about for a long time and finally you realized, oh, I can do this now. Or if it was just something that kind of popped into your head one day, semi recently, and then was more of a not so much spur of the moment, but less of something you considered for multiple years, and then what then led from that one time to go into like, "Oh, maybe I'll get a different one," because I think it's all of those micro decisions that are, to me, the fascinating part of this, because that's how it happens. That's sort of the nuts and bolts of what we're talking about here. Do you recall those details, or do you wanna
Yeah,
discuss from that
I do.
angle? Okay.
I do. I think I had the thought that I had seen in I think there was, an older $100 bill, like the ones they used to have in either the '60s or '50s or whatever,
Mhm.
and then one from the '20s in a bank I used to go to with my dad, and I just remember thinking of banks and paper currency, dollar bills as, um, something that meant that you were doing well in the world if you had those, for obvious reasons.
Mhm.
And so I think I was thinking back to that, also associated with my dad, and just kind of feeling like I could get a little bit of someone's experience feeling at the top of the world, feeling at the top of their game, a successful member of society.
Mhm.
If I looked at each of those, I mean, it's a little bit related to people's interest in historical artifacts or something. It's like a little
Yeah.
piece of history I think about, whoever earned a $100 bill in 1918 or whatever it is, and how valuable that was then, and it might have been worth, like, what a $500 bill, if such a thing exists,
Mhm.
today, what it would be like today, and it's like, "What were you doing with that? That was such a big deal. What's the
Yeah.
history of this?" I just became interested from a historical standpoint, but with that original, link back to being a kid and being with my dad and the importance of dollar bills to him.
So you've
Does
thought about
that
it for a
Yeah.
long time then. This is something that the roots of this idea of acquiring something like this wasn't just like it occurred over the span of a week. This is something where the foundation was set for a couple decades before you acquired one?
Yeah, but I always felt like, well, I can't, I'd have to have $100 to get a $100 bill, and then to get a rare or older $100 bill,
More
God knows how
expensive.
much that is, and so I was in my late 20s at the time that I finally realized, "Oh, wait, I can do this if I wanna
Yeah.
spend, several $100 on a older $100 bill. I
Yeah.
can do that. This is so cool." And then that little thrill of collecting came in, and I had this fantasy, most of this, I think, unconscious,
Yeah.
of what if I collected every $100 bill that has ever existed, and I picture them in, like, a museum-like,
Uh-huh.
glass in a room that doesn't exist, that didn't
Yeah,
exist
yeah.
in my apartment in New York City at the time. Um, and it was just this feeling that to have the complete collection,
Yeah.
amazing that would feel, and I pictured other like, people being interested in it. It was,
Yeah.
I don't know how to describe it. It does feel a little evolutionary, like an alpha would have the complete collection of something, of, like,
Yeah.
weapons or, some sort of wigwam or whatever it is that would allow them to attract a mate better. I mean, I may be
Yeah.
looking into it too much, but
No,
something
I
feels
think
right there.
that's yeah, I think that's accurate. And, in the past it was just resources. The more resources you had, the better your chances of survival were. And now that survival is a lot more we're a lot more insulated in our survival now. Things are more comfortable, and I think those urges can then present themselves in other ways. And I think what you brought up just perfectly underlines the observations I was making, at least from my perspective, which were that one, there's always this personal significance angle of like, oh, wouldn't it be cool? Or like, the idea of a historical artifact and thinking of the people that held it. People don't just collect randomly, like you're not just going to collect things you find on the ground for no reason. Maybe you would if that was particularly interesting, but I think there's that personal significance angle there for sure. And the other piece is that you mentioned, which was the the ideology of it. You said you imagined this in a room that doesn't necessarily exist, a collection that doesn't exist, people responding to it that don't necessarily exist, and what it was such a projection into the future of what this would look like. And I think that's exactly what I'm thinking of it in describing in this context is this idea that when we go in pursuit of something, we are imagining how we will feel with it, what people might say, or rooms that in a room in a house that doesn't exist, and stuff like that. And that to me is why this becomes cyclical, because generally it's this imagined ideological state, a person we want to be that we aren't, at the moment. And so that's it's so fascinating to me.
Oh, yeah, I love that, and it reminds me of something. It's around this idea of the idealization of the collection.
Yeah.
I I think had, once again, an unconscious, idea, this fantasy of when I got the whole collection together, being able to show it off either to another collector that would be so impressed by my collection, or
Yeah.
perhaps to, someone starting their collection who would be in awe of mine.
Yeah.
And I didn't know why that would be important, but, it's just it's occurring to me as we're speaking right now that I was on the other side of this, and I actually did this to a collector,
Hmm.
and I thought his reaction was interesting. So, I
uh,
mentioned that I collect '80s and '90s nostalgia, and one of
mhm.
the things that for some reason is very appealing to me are the little, like, candy and, fruit snacks and juice boxes that were just, like, the coolest things to try to trade at lunch, and they kinda just were to me, they meant, like, carefree fun times being a kid in the '90s.
I remember
Um
your ecto cooler collection.
Yes, that's
Your
right, the Ecto Cooler.
high C ecto cooler.
That's one of my prize, members of the collection is that
Yeah.
unopened Hi-C Ecto Cooler from, like, 1989 or whatever.
Yeah.
Um, I remember looking online because I really wanted to source a, unopened package of Shark Bites, which were like a
Mm,
fruit snack that was super
mhm,
popular in the '80s and '90s.
mhm.
And, hopefully some people listening will remember there was a white shark that was like the,
Oh, yeah.
mystery flavor.
I do
Yeah,
remember that.
you do? Those
Yeah.
were the best. So I looked online to see if anybody was selling shark bites. What's the odds, that someone didn't open it, and what kind of state would it be in being like, 20 plus years old or whatever. And I actually found this guy who seemed to have a collection of like every snack like made in the '90s. I was like, holy crap. And I
Huh.
reached out to him, and to my surprise, he lived in New York, and he was like, "Oh my god, are you a collector? You like this stuff? There's not many of us. We should get together." And I was
Yeah.
like, "Whoa," because he puts pictures on this website he has,
Uh-huh.
of all of these fruit snacks and candies and stuff from, like, I mean, I think the '80s and '90s, he had everything. I was like, "Wow, this
Uh-huh.
guy's, like, the guru of, something nobody cares about except for me and him and a few other people," but, I went and I met him, and I was just kind of at one point telling him how amazing it was that he had a Shark Bites package.
Mhm.
And he even brought it to show it to me because he
Oh,
knew
wow.
what a big deal it was. So he takes it out of this, like, little, briefcase that he had with him. We were sitting at a Starbucks,
Uh-huh.
and I, like, held it in my hands. I was like, "Oh my god, this was so important to me," when I was, like, 11
Yeah.
years old. And we get to the end of our time, and I was like, "This was really amazing. Thank you so much for showing this to me. It's like a little piece of history I had. It's so cool." And then he goes, "You know what? Take it." And I was like, "What?"
Wow.
He's like, "You can have the package. Honestly, I have so many random candies. I've already taken a picture for my website, and I could tell it means a lot to you. Take it." And I
Wow.
was it was to me, felt like one of the most generous things anyone has ever done as far as giving us a physical object
Yeah.
that I had ever experienced. I was truly in awe. I was like, "I can't believe you're giving me this." There's probably half a dozen on Earth that anyone knows about. There's
Yeah.
none on the internet other than his. Um, it's rare, but nobody cares about it, and yet to me, I do care. So it's like, well, I will never find this opportunity again. And he
Yeah.
left, and I just remember thinking, why did he do that? I don't understand it, but I'm so happy he did it. And I think it's because this is one of those moments that we you were just talking about, and I'm referring to, where the idealization is most sweet, where you have someone else that's in awe that is joining you in that moment, a fellow collector, and they
Yeah.
actually love your collection, and you can give them a moment that I bet he'll never forget that either. I don't know how many times he's
Yeah.
blessed somebody in that way, but
Well, he seemed surprised that you were even interested, so I think
yeah,
he got something out of being like, "Oh, wow, I've spent all this time and effort collecting these things, and here's someone who appreciates it that I can, talk to in person." And he's fascinated by this one, and if he has plenty of others, he can sort of make your day. And I think there's a certain kind of person where that idea of making someone's day in the way that he did really appeals to them, and I think that is something that I feel sometimes where it can just feel so nice to do something for someone that maybe doesn't feel like the hugest gesture to you, but it is to them, and I think I really like moments like that. So it's funny because in a way it's a very touching story, and in a way it's funny because another way of looking at it is it's just a small packet of fruit snacks, but I feel the significance of what it is, um, ideologically, or what it is in that sense. And I think that's a cool gesture and a really great thing that can happen when people come together around collections and collecting. And while he gave you something, I think he also got something from that as well, which is feeling feeling like he did something that he's happy about, or
yeah, and in a way, it's a little bit full circle to what we were talking about. Collections can feel meaningless most of the time. We're not thinking about them. When you get the item, you're like, okay, I have it. And it kind of actually brings us back to the subject we started with, which is like, why is collecting worth it? Like, is it as impactful as it seems when you're first coming up with the idea? And I think it all becomes worth it when you connect with another human being about your collection that can relate.
uh
Like, that's the only time that
yeah,
collecting really feels worth it. Yeah, the fantasizing about it is cool and interesting. It's not that that's not worth it, but I think
yeah.
that the big deal is connecting with people about it.
That's an interesting thought, and a funny thought. I agree with you that I don't think that's always the case, but I think for many people that's a big part of it, just because we're inherently social as human beings, and so things that have a social basis are significantly more powerful than things that don't. But I was having a recollection of a funny experience, which is that, as you well know, most things that I get interested in, I go super deep into them because that's what I find fascinating. I want to like explore every corner of something, and I kind of have a voracious appetite for information. And so when I get involved in something, I really get involved in it. And then then I'm like, "Oh, man, I wish there was someone I could talk to about this. I wish there was someone." And there's been times where I come across someone who's like, "Oh, yeah, I like that." And I'm like, "Oh, great." And then I start talking and they're like, I didn't know that," you know? And I'm like, "Oh, shit."
Yeah.
So it's like
Uh,
I am looking for a degree of enthusiasm, not enthusiasm, but a degree of depth in a topic that just most people aren't interested in and don't go into, and it's just funny how that catches me by surprise because 'cause I'm like, "Perfect, we can talk about this thing," and then someone's like, "Oh, what? What is that?" And I'm like, "Okay, we're not not on the same page here."
that's funny. Do you think the people that do that are just those people that always like to be agreeable and say, "Yeah, yeah, I like that," or do they
I think they
genuinely
are
think, "Oh, no, I'm a
interested.
collector"? Yeah.
Well, I wouldn't find this out by, like, saying, "Oh, I'm really interested in this. Is this something you're interested in?" Like, I would hear them talking about it, or someone else would tell me that this is something they're interested in, so a trustworthy way of determining that this is something they have a relationship with, but it just goes to show that in many situations, most people are not interested in the degree of depth that I find interesting in certain topics. Like, I really wanna get into the weeds of a subject, and, it's just it's funny to me because of the amount of times it's taken me by surprise where I'm like, "Oh, yeah, that's right. Most people don't go this far into a subject," you know? Some people do, but it's more rare, and it's just a funny experience because 'cause I'm like, "Finally!" And then I'm like, "Okay, never mind."
That is funny. That, unsurprisingly, because we're doing this podcast together, happens to me too. Uh,
Yeah,
I'm, like, really into whiskey, as you know, and I've met people that, I mention I'm into whiskey. Usually, I start
yeah.
by saying it, and they're like, "Oh, yeah, me too. I love whiskey. I'm really into it." And then I find out that they know, like, well, they're about 1/10 as interested as I am.
Yeah.
Maybe
They
it's the
haven't gone
depth
deep with
thing.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, they haven't gone deep with it. They can't talk about which variety of the same label or brand or whatever they like the most. Like, they'll be like, "Oh, yeah, I think there's, like, 2 versions." That I'll be like, "There's 60 versions of it, and each version has a different year, and there's one that's barrel proof, and there's a" and it's like, "Oh,
Yeah,
if you don't know that, because 'cause I'm about to tell you which barrel proof of which year of which whiskey I like the most. You just
yeah,
can say you like 1 whiskey or 2 whiskeys or
yeah,
something." So yeah, it's a bit of a letdown, but,
yeah.
then again, you go on the internet, and there's fanatics for almost any collection. So,
Yes.
but where are those people in real life?
I know. Yeah, because there's people that can go just so far off the deep end that it's almost shocking that it exists. And it also reminds me of something funny of then in terms of whiskey, and then there's people like me who don't like whiskey and enjoy tasting all of your finest whiskeys to say, "Nope, I don't like that one either."
You are the rare person that a collector shares his collection openly with and
Who doesn't
outwardly
like
hates the collection. But I still always wanna be like, "Why don't you taste this and see if you really hate this very high-end bottle of whiskey?" And the answer is
Yeah.
always yes.
I feel like that's something funny that we bonded about because it's a very unusual way of interacting with someone, and it's just I don't know, there's something I find funny there's something that appeals to that little funny, quirky situation, I think, to both of us that it just becomes a source of humor more than anything, and it's enjoyable. I have another direction I wanted to take this in if you're on board with that.
Totally.
So I think a big part of the kind of ravenous collecting that we've been describing, or just the cyclical collecting, perhaps ravenous is too strong of a word, but cyclical collecting, um, I think one of the most mainstream forms of collecting would be the shopaholic, the person who's just always buying new outfits, new shoes, and things that they might not often wear or things they don't necessarily need. But it really speaks to that excitement around, like, oh my God, this dress, I'm going to look so good. I'm going to go to this event in this dress, or these shoes finally complete this outfit. And I think it really is the same kind of thing. I wouldn't think of that as collecting, but I think the mechanisms that exist behind this, these kind of dopamine driven activities that make something really exciting and give you kind of a rush from securing something, are the same. And so we couldn't have this conversation if we didn't discuss this notion of filling the void, so to speak, or filling the hole, as some people say, which is that people are carrying out these behaviors and um, acquiring things for their collection to I don't know how to say this in a way that isn't cliche. I'm trying to find my own words for it and struggling to, but I think we're trying to reach something inside deep inside of ourselves that can't be reached through these items. We get this short excitement from securing a new bottle of whiskey, a new pair of Jordans, whatever. And in the moment it's like, "Oh, I feel good. This is what I wanted. I've been in search for this for so long. Maybe I don't need anything else." And it just continues after that. And I think that's the trying to fill the void. We're trying to fix something, or maybe fix is not the right word, but people who are seeking material items like that, which we all do, are feeling some sort of incompleteness, and we're attempting to make that more complete by adding in these items or acquiring more things. And I think that's why it becomes cyclical, because it can't do that. These things can't reach that place that we're attempting to reach. And so some people do this by moving all the time or going on certain vacations all the time. And I don't mean to condemn any of these things, because we're all human, and we all do this to some degree. But it's fascinating to me that I think that's why it's happening. Is there something deep in us that we are seeking to, whether it's a self-actualization thing, we want to be the person that has this collection, or how people might view us. But I feel pretty strongly that these things can't actually reach that. There can be a temporary satisfaction, and there absolutely is. And I am someone who enjoys collecting certain kinds of things. So I'm again not condemning this, but do you think that's true? What's your stance on that?
Um, I actually think the comparison between shopaholism and collecting is pretty damn good.
Mhm,
I at first resisted that a little bit because
mhm.
I'm realizing through this, conversation that I collect more things than I realize. I'm like, "Oh, I collect whiskey and currency and '80s and '90s nostalgia." Like, what else do I collect? Probably
It's
other things.
satisfying. I
Uh,
I enjoy collecting as well, and
yeah,
for the same reasons. There's something appealing about it, and I haven't picked that lock yet. I still feel that pull and that
yeah,
satisfaction.
yeah. So one angle, that I wanna explore, which is a contrast to the angle I already brought up about collecting, which is, like, that you have this fantasy of being able to show it off, of being,
Yeah.
the most suitable to a mate or, whatever, to put it into that kind of frame.
Mhm.
The other one is, what if I need this? And you brought this up
Preppers.
as
We're getting into preppers.
preppers.
Yeah.
Yes, getting into preppers. When I collect things, my version of being a shopaholic is I'll just sometimes buy a bunch of things on Amazon that I don't need, and
Mm.
usually I'm doing it, and tell me if I'm veering off track too much. Usually I'm doing it because I imagine I have a small fantasy of we really need this item, even if it's like a piece of servingware or like a, meat thermometer or something like that, like a digital meat thermometer or something, where it's
Yeah.
like, "What? Oh, shoot, do you happen to have that? Otherwise, we won't know the temperature of the turkey."
Yeah.
Um, and me being like, "Yeah, actually, yes, we do have one," and how good that would feel
Never
to
been
have the
opened.
thing you need. Never
Yeah.
been open, yeah. In fact, I can't find it and it's lost somewhere and we don't have it even though I bought it. Um, but, uh I think I have that fantasy a lot. What if I need it? And
Yeah.
I can imagine, the shopaholic who buys every different version of a piece of clothing or every different type of clothing or whatever, as like, "Well, what if I need the perfect outfit for this occasion?" I think I've heard people say that, so that's one
Yeah.
theory.
Yeah. So I'm glad you brought that up. I think that's very interesting. I think it's veering off of the collecting angle in a way, but I think the collecting angle was only a conduit for trying to reach the concept that exists beneath it. And I think the sort of prepping thing does exist, or does connect to that same concept, which is wanting more of something for a particular reason, right? It sounds too vague and abstract when phrased that way, but I think it's the same notion. It's this idea of wanting more of something to satisfy a certain situation. It's built on an idea of what would happen if this person asks for this thing and we don't have that thing, then this doesn't happen, right? That's a situation that often isn't being encountered at that time, but it's an imagined idea of it. And there's plenty of times where that kind of insight is very useful, of like, oh my God, we're hosting Thanksgiving this year and we don't have a serving tray for this. Like, I should get one. That's based off an imagined idea still, but it's very helpful. So there's nothing wrong with it being imagination based when I mention that. But I think this has a lot in common, and the prepping thing, more so than just collecting, almost feels like one of the most ancient comforts that I can imagine, second to things like eating and shelter, but, like, when life was a lot less certain and even lifespan was shorter, life was just less certain in every way, having certain things did mean a greater success. And if you think about us existing here as extensions of the people that came before us, we are inheriting some of their um, ways of approaching things, both from a society angle and from a genetic and epigenetic level. I think where those kind of things can be inherited. But yeah, that speaks to the same notion, I think. It's fascinating. I relate to that as well, of not wanting to be caught in a situation unprepared, and will, you know, in some cases have more than I need of certain things, or a particular item that is maybe largely impractical for my daily life, but there's something that feels satisfying about knowing that, well, if this were to happen, then I would be, it's like a bomb shelter. It's like, chances are, far and away, it will never ever get used. And everything, the food that you put in there will all go to waste. But it's this idea that, like, well, if I'd rather, what's the quote? I'd rather have it and not need it than need it and not have it. And that kind of underlines this whole thing, which is, and it can get too far. Some people go wild with this stuff, and there's probably caches of food and weapons and bomb shelters and stuff that people have that would just boggle most people's minds. But maybe they have the resources for it, and it scratches this deep itch of, like, I want to be able to protect my family in every situation I can imagine. And I think it isn't the same as collecting sneakers, but I think it's motivated by the same drive,
Yeah.
or a very similar drive, at least, if not the same.
Would you want a bomb shelter?
I kind of feel like, if I had, it gets complicated thinking about things that are very resource intensive, like having an airplane, or a dirt bike that would use just for escaping some drastic situation. But I feel similarly to you that it's like, I don't think I would need something like that, but I would feel some sense of comfort from having that. That if that I'm prepared for more situations than I was before. There is something deeply appealing about that to me, that I'm like, okay, well, if this happens, I'm ready for that, at least
Yeah.
in this material sense. So would I, drop $250,000 or half $1 million to acquire that? That's where it becomes a different story. If all these things were free, I would probably have a ridiculous collections and warehouses of things, because there's this desire just to collect. And I think the piece that I also want to point out is, and this connects to, this is where it starts to get into many different topics, but I think it's rare for people to go, you know what? I think this is all I need. I think my collection is complete. I think that is
Mhm.
incredibly rare. I think people just kind of become the things they collect. They're like, well, I'm a sneakerhead now, so I just will get more. Or maybe I'll start a business buying and selling. They just kind of become these things. But I think there's something really great about being like, you know what? I think I have enough of this. Maybe I'll look at a new hobby. There's something kind of very self aware and almost beautiful about that kind of observation. I'm not sure why. There's something very appealing about that. Maybe because it feels like it is breaking the cycle. I tend to not think of cycles as being particularly healthy, because they just are round and around loops. Whereas I think, uh, I don't know, that things should change more than they would in a cyclical pattern.
Yeah, I wouldn't have thought of what you just said,
Which
because I
part?
guess with the idea that it would be really nice to just end your collection and start a new one at a certain point, so you're not compulsively
Yeah.
buying things.
Does that
Um,
ring true for you? What do you think of it?
well, it does, but I don't have any concern about the compulsive nature of my collecting. I
Hmm,
don't wanna then generalize that out. I don't
sure.
have concern about, well, I mean, a minor concern, like the Amazon stuff. How many thousands of dollars have I wasted buying things I don't need on Amazon? Like, you've
Mhm.
watched me do that many times. You're like, "You know what? I'm gonna get the brightest flashlight that has ever,
That
been
exists on
invented."
Earth.
You watched me buy that, and you know what?
Yeah.
I freaking love it. I still have it, and I use it once
Yeah.
every 6 months, and I
Yeah.
love that usage. Um literally just to show it to people. I've never
Yeah.
needed it for any survival situation.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, like, the collections I mentioned, I don't I don't over collect, and I don't have any issue with, like, compulsively overbuying in them, but I must say, like, with whiskey, there was a time that I did. I think a time in my life when I was more anxious, it did fill something.
Yeah.
So I have to admit that's true, but I never worry that I'm gonna keep doing it, and perhaps that's because I don't have a addictive personality
Mm.
like some people do, and so maybe I have some control. I kinda let myself use it as a substitute well, as a comfort when I'm
Mhm.
anxious, but then I
Sure.
know eventually that anxiety will go down, I'll take care of it, I'll work on my issues, whatever it is. But I don't actively worry. Why do you actively worry about your collections?
No, I think it's something interesting where I do have an addictive personality, and as a result of noticing that, I am very aware of that, and I think maybe that's where my perspective is coming from, is I've really built that up inside me of, like, "Let's not get carried away with this," like, "Do I really need all this?" Or like, asking myself those questions, so I think it perfectly segues into another piece I wanted to discuss here, which is, when is it problematic? Because that's something that is another interesting piece to discuss, I guess. Um, and for some people, it's spending too much money. Maybe someone is really overspending. They're racking up credit card debt from shopping too much or buying shoes. So I would say that's a position where it then is too much, because now you are sacrificing some of the comfort and security of your life for the compulsion of collecting. And I think that crosses a line that I would probably consider unhealthy. It's not really up to me to decide for all people what the rules are or should be, but I would say, by my own personal definition, that would be a boundary to watch out for people. Another one, like, to go in a direction neither of us probably anticipated. I think this is a similar thing to hoarders. I think hoarding is perhaps a more emotional, less logical, but I don't really know that much about that. But it's similar, where it's like people are collecting newspapers from the last 50 years. Why? I don't know. Maybe they think they're going to reference something. Maybe it's just they like having information, or people that, like, it's kind of a similar thing. And so that would be, hoarding is something that can get unhealthy, where there can be then actual health risks from the environment. But it's interesting to think of, that are there boundaries for this? Should there be boundaries for this? For me, like I said, because I do can have an addictive personality, I tend to set I let myself enjoy things, and have fun with them, because I think that's really important. But I also am like, okay, maybe this is more than I reasonably need, and I kind of enjoy the idea of going through things and sort of getting rid of things. I feel lighter when I can say, you know what, I haven't used these things in a few years. I think I'm gonna sell them or donate them or something. I enjoy kind of that process of not acquiring too much. I feel sort of loaded down when I have too many things. But yeah, that's kind of my take on that. Went in a few different directions, but
Yeah.
um, whether I think it's problematic or something I watch out for, that's what I would say.
Yeah, I feel like the decision matrix related to whether you've gotten to the point where your collection is, not a good idea, balances a few different factors. One is, like, your resources, like you mentioned, like, can you
Mhm.
afford to do that? Or,
Yeah,
I guess either in money or in time. And then
yeah,
how much joy it's bringing you. Like, if something's bringing you no joy, you should spend no resources on it. And it might not be joy, it may be some sort of satisfaction, meaning something else in the positive realm. I'm just using joy as a
yeah,
catch-all. And then, also, is it actively producing stress? Like,
yeah,
somehow, a collection could reflect or cause negativity or something like that as well. I can imagine certain things.
mhm,
So maybe the balance of those three things. But my thought is that if you have, let's say, you just have tons of money for a collection,
mhm,
if you're, and I've seen people do this, like I've seen really wealthy people collect cars, and I can't tell if they're enjoying it or not taking it out. I would say it's even if they can afford it, it's not a good idea if they're just collecting it because of compulsive reasons. But if they
yeah,
drive the cars and they like it and they can afford it, fine. Um, But if somehow, like, the cars are getting them negative attention or they're causing friction with other people in some way, it's socially, causing issues with our community, then
Yeah,
I'd say that's the stress side of it.
yeah,
So those are the 3 factors I can think of that would indicate whether whether a collection should be, continued, from a practical standpoint at least. But I like
yeah,
the notion that you can just be done with it and say, "It's time to move on. I'm gonna sell the collection."
yeah.
Um, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's pretty comprehensive for just off the top of your head, so I applaud you for creating some good boundaries there around theoretically what are considerations, and I do agree with those, and I think that's what should be considered. The one other piece that I want to mention for the conversation is something that I just alluded to briefly before, which is that some people become their collections, where maybe from an early age they start collecting, I don't know, sports memorabilia and probably they had a parent or multiple friends that were into sports, and so there's some social significance there that applies. And I think people just tend to become those things. It's very unlikely for someone who spends 20 years collecting sports memorabilia to go, you know what, I think I'm gonna stop collecting this. I think people tend to become their collections, and that's something that I like about this idea of like, has this thing run its course? Am I still getting joy from this? To reference one of the points that you made. And that's what I think I really appeals to me is like, is this still me? Is this am I being defined by my collection, or am I defining my collection and my actions? And so there's something I like about taking mental stock, and similar to what I said I do with my possessions, which is like, do I still need this? I'm in the process of that with music gear right now, where I acquired more than I'm using, more than I need for sure. And it's like, yeah, it's nice to have these. I like the variety, but I don't need all this. I'm not using it anymore. And so for me, it's like I would like to unload some of this, and I could just have continued to collect, and maybe I build a studio, and I like this. There's something that appeals to me, and this could just be personal, that appeals to me about this idea of like, okay, I think this collection has run its course. I'm actually going to unload some of this, and then I kind of want to throw my line out in the water again in life and see what else appeals to me. What else is out there that's interesting to me? Because um, I think we can learn about ourselves from going in new directions like that, and allowing ourselves to be redefined by maybe getting rid of some things that don't suit us anymore and taking on new things. And I really like that there's an idea of evolution in there, of individual evolution. And I think there's something that, to use the same word again, that seems very beautiful to me, or is very, uh, I don't know, that's the best word I can put to it right now. Have you had
Yeah.
any experience with that, or does that seem like something that might be more so personal to me, or do you feel like you can see yourself in that to some degree as well?
I completely see your point that it's a beautiful thing to experience renewal where
Mhm,
you, eliminate something, that has been a part of your life and then, take up something new. That
mhm,
feels human and
mhm,
healthy and development, oriented,
mhm,
and so I really like it. I was reflecting on the fact that I don't really do that very much. I do
mhm,
something I think that is also healthy, which is like, like my stamp and my coin collections. I didn't get rid of them. I still
mhm,
have them. They're just in a bag, and I haven't looked at them in years.
mhm,
They're just in a storage, box in the basement. But I have moved on from them. So I've done
mhm,
that, but I haven't done the part where I get rid of them. So I'm a
mhm,
bit intrigued by that because I have heard that idea in, popular culture. I think a number of years ago, there was a I don't know if it was related to, like, the feng shui book that was popular, and it was about, like, just getting rid of everything. So
mm,
I'm relating it to having heard that 6, 7 years
yeah,
ago or something like that. I think there is something comforting to many people of simplifying their lives. For me, I would keep it as long as there's a place for it that's organized. I would never,
mhm,
like, make my space messy for something I don't need, so that I
yeah,
would do it if that was at risk.
yeah,
But, yeah, do you need to get rid of it? Can you integrate it? If we're almost going to a metaphor of, like,
yeah,
characteristics and of who you are, but can you
but
integrate it, or do you have to get rid of it?
I think that's an interesting point, and I think I'm seeing something in the pursuit of that, which is generally I will hit a wall of resources I'm willing to dedicate to something, whether it's space or financial resources. And so for me, I one, I want to characterize that I'm slow to get rid of things because it's hard for me to go, man, do I really want to make the final decision to end this chapter and get rid of this item that at one point was important to me? And so I take
Yeah.
time to do that. And I think I try to be very present and allow plenty of time to go by. I don't like making snap decisions. And what's fun for me is feeling like, okay, well, I think I have moved on from this. It's not, maybe it wasn't what I thought it was to begin with, but there was some reason I acquired it. It was something that was supposed to be good or should be good, but it didn't really, I didn't really connect with it personally. And so there's something that's fun about feeling like, okay, I'm going to sell this and then I can save some of this money, or I can then use some of this money to buy other things. So I like the kind of sustainability angle, or sort of the renewing ability of like, I'm going to take some resources that are sequestered in this thing, whether it's space or money or whatever, unload this thing that I don't feel a connection with anymore, and I will feel some lightness from letting go of that and some disappointment as well. And then I can use some of those resources for different things. And I think that's what I enjoy about it, is it's kind of like shifting around equity. And if I just had unlimited financial resources, or much more significant financial resources and more space, I might not feel the same way, but I'm not bothered by that because it's kind of like the the approach that some parents take with their kids, which is like, well, if you want a new toy, we have to get rid of an old toy. And there's something I like about that. I don't think it's always necessary, but I think it, for me at least, I think it helps me be more present. And I don't suggest that that is or should be what other people feel, but for my own personal experiences, that's something that I like about that, which is like, okay, this is sort of a bittersweet ending of one thing, but it's an exciting start of something else, and it appeals to me. There's plenty of times where I don't want to do that, and sometimes when I say slow to get rid of things, it can be a number of years of thinking about it, but that's kind of the progression for me.
Yeah. There is something that imitates the natural evolution of life in it, and I think that's what's
Yeah,
beautiful about it, and
probably.
it demonstrates discipline as well. So
Yeah,
there's something good, like inherently good about what you're saying. I just find it interesting that I don't do that very much, but I console myself by saying that, I do move on from things and go into new seasons in my life and stuff. It's just that
yeah,
I sort of like, my stamp collection, I do look at every 5 years, and I
yeah,
get a little bit of joy, and that's it. It's kinda like old photo albums, it's
yeah,
like, you really want to have them, but, how often do you look at them? It's not you're not getting tons of joy, but it's nice for every so often, that you do look at it, if you have the space for it, so
yeah. And I think an important distinction I'm feeling from that is that, at least for me and my perspective, none of my perspective is prescriptive to you or other people, because I think these are, and that's just generally how I feel. There's some things I might feel more strongly about, other topics or something, but generally I feel like it's really important for people just to be present and to consider the circumstances they're in. And it's like, is this fine? Is this not fine? Do I enjoy doing it one way? Do I enjoy doing it the other way? Because I think there's a lot of room for individual expression in there, and I think that's really important. I don't think
yeah,
there is a right or wrong way of doing it. I can suggest for people what something that I enjoy, but I like that you have a different way of doing it, and it's not something that's causing a problem. You're not tripping over boxes in the hallway or something, and it's like
yeah,
occasionally you get enjoyment out of it, and that's fine. That's still getting enjoyment out of it, even if it's infrequent. That doesn't mean that that's problematic or anything. So I think if I could leave people with any lesson, at least from my perspective, it's that be present, think about these things, give yourself time to process, really be open to looking at all the angles of something. So you're not like, well, I do have $40,000 of credit card debt, but like, that's not so bad, like really be present, maybe, be willing to set some boundaries or something, but decide these things for yourself, and keep in mind that, what we've presented are a few different options of how we do things and exploring various topics, but that it's ultimately up to individuals to decide what they think.
yeah, agreed. I think that's part of why we enjoy sharing these ideas because we're figuring out what we think through having
Mhm.
these conversations and teasing out different aspects of subjects. And
Yeah.
then, our hope is anyone who's listening, would, be thinking the same, and please comment, what you feel, agree, disagree, what you took out of this, that we're gonna be so interested to read what you guys have to say.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Any final thoughts there, or was that your final thought wrap up?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, well, yeah, thanks everyone for watching. We ask that you please like the video if you enjoyed it. It's the best way you can help support us right now. If you want to see our videos in your feed, make sure to subscribe. And if you want to be notified when we upload, subscribe and then hit the bell icon. And as always, let us know what you think in the comments below. Part of the most interesting thing here is gathering as many perspectives as we can. We really want to know what people think because that is absolutely fascinating. We know what we think, and sometimes we're exploring that more in real time, but we really want to know what you guys think, whether it's ideas about this episode, ideas for new episodes, anything and everything. Feel free to leave that in the comments below. So, yeah, thank you everyone for watching, and we'll see you next time. You should wait 5 seconds and then go. Bye.